Every empire swears its money is safe. Every dynasty insists its paper will hold. And then one morning, you walk to the market and watch prices sprint while your notes stand still. The numbers printed on the bill tell you a story about value. The stallkeeper's eyes tell you a different one. Ming China printed promises by the cartload and then watched a nation stop believing. If money is trust, what happens when trust disappears between sunrise and sunset? People forget how old paper money is because they assume Europe invented modern finance and everything else was prologue. Long before European banks flirted with paper, Chinese merchants were writing claims on copper cash and trading those claims like coins. The habit began in river towns where moving goods was easy, but moving metal was not. Receipts became exchangeable. Exchangeable receipts became money. The state noticed, stepped in, and standardized it. Under the Song, paper made trade faster and safer. Under the Mongol yuan, it marched with armies and tax collectors. Across centuries, the design changed, the seals changed, the slogans changed. The physics did not. Paper holds only so long as people believe the printers will show restraint, that a promise will be honored, that tomorrow's shopkeeper will see the bill the same way today does. The early Ming wanted unity after chaos. They wanted simplicity in place of fractured currencies and local customs. They wanted a single line from the throne to the market that said, "Here is value, carry it with confidence." So they issued great treasure notes, impressively large, handsomely bordered, splashed with warnings about the fate of counterfeiters and the authority of the Son of Heaven. You could feel the ambition in the fiber. Paper travels lighter than copper. Paper can cross mountains where wagons stall. Paper lets a central government act in many places at once. In theory, an emperor with ink has fewer limits than an emperor with mints. Then came the appetite of a living state. A famine in one province, a flood in another, a border to garrison, roads to repair, granaries to refill, officials to pay. Some taxes arrived in grain and cloth and labor, which solved the treasury's inventories, but not its need to spend quickly in 1,000 directions at once. Paper solved the logistics. It did not solve scarcity. Revenues sagged, obligations did not. When in doubt, printers work. The new notes looked crisp, the promises looked familiar. And yet with every new sheet, the average dish at the market asked for a little more money, not as a protest, just as a correction. Confidence doesn't shatter loudly like dropped porcelain. It is like old silk. It stretches a little, then a little more, and then one day your fingers go right through. At first, the treasure notes bought what the text on their face said they would buy because everyone else accepted them at that rate. That is what fiat means in practice, the social fact of acceptance. The butcher took them because the baker did. The baker took them because the cloth seller did. But as more paper arrived, subtle negotiations began. One extra note for the meat this week, only until the next shipment comes, of course. A little discount if you insist on settling with paper rather than coin. Just this once, you understand. A glance over your shoulder at the next stall to check what everyone else is doing. The math of the street was correcting the math of the printers. Officials still drew salaries in the notes, and many of them tried to spend those notes into goods that held value regardless of decree. The court issued edicts forbidding discounting and mandating acceptance. They changed the design, scolded the speculators, and punished the merchants who advertised two prices. The penalties signaled authority but whispered worry. Every remedy essentially said, "Trust us." Every remedy reminded the crowd why it didn't. Power can command acceptance. It cannot command belief. Prices are simply the crowd's opinion about tomorrow, and the crowd is stubborn when it learns the taste of loss. While the Ming were perfecting inks and borders, the world was hauling silver out of mountains. Mines in Japan fed regional trade. Across the oceans, new mines in the Americas poured a metallic river into global markets. Ships stitched together ports that had never agreed on anything, except that payment that holds its shape is easier to love than paper that doesn't. Tea, silk, and porcelain sailed out of China. Silver sailed in. In ledger after ledger, a pattern emerged. Large payments cleared in metal. Private contracts wrote amounts in silver weight. Tax officials, eager to simplify and standardize, angled collections toward one clear medium. Confidence moved away from paper because silver solved more problems with fewer words. The more transactions migrated to silver, the less paper mattered. The less paper mattered, the lower its exchange rate drifted against coin and ingot. Discounts grew from polite to painful. Markets were not declaring war on the state. They were choosing the tool that hurt least. Paper tried to be money through the authority of law. Silver was money through the authority of desire. And when a government's accounting diverges from the public's accounting, there is no statute strong enough to close the gap. The state can join the market or chase it. The Ming chased. Imagine a provincial market at the turn. Drought pinches grain. The shipment is late. Soldiers receive fresh notes instead of what local merchants really want. The miller posts new prices until supplies improve. The butcher explains that his supplier demanded silver and so must he. The cloth merchant, stung by last month's loss, now adds a surcharge for paper that he assures you he takes only to stay in the emperor's good graces. The governor circulates a proclamation that reiterates previous proclamations. Paper is legal tender at the stated value. Discounting will be punished. The proclamation hangs. The crowd reads it. Life continues. By sundown, stallkeepers take paper at a brutal haircut. By morning, a few refuse it outright. If you count your savings in notes, if you pay your rent in notes, if you feed your children in notes, it feels as if trust vanished overnight. But the truth is that 100 small doubts finally learned to speak the same language. Macro failure translates as micro schemes to survive. Salaried officials with shrinking purchasing power sought side payments and invented fees that transformed petty corruption into a parallel income system. Farmers faced taxes that increasingly demanded what the community actually trusted. Grain in poor harvests, labor that could not be discounted, silver when available. If the granary clerk preferred metal but you had none, your wheat became the treasury's hedge against the paper it had been printing. Merchants who understood the transition arbitraged it. Buy paper cheap, buy essentials with it, if anyone would still accept it. Convert whatever you could into silver or goods that would hold value over the winter. The working poor, with no buffer and wages that lagged behind the new prices, paid with time, hunger, and humiliation. The failure was not moral in design, only in effect. You do not need villains to create a monetary collapse. You only need arithmetic and habit. Look closely and the mechanism is plain. Paper without a credible way to turn it into something else is a loop that converts trust into heat. As long as the loop runs slowly, no one notices the friction. As obligations multiply, the loop spins faster. The warmth that once felt like a stimulus becomes smoke. Convertibility can be metallic, it can be fiscal, it can be institutional, but it must be something other than more paper. The Ming promised redemption into new notes and demanded that the citizenry pretend that it counted. People tried, until they couldn't. Fiscal needs outran tax reality. Harvests don't care about budgets, floods don't consult the treasury, soldiers won't wait for a good season. The court leaned on the tool within reach. When you can create claims at will, you will be tempted to treat them as a solution rather than bridge. But issuing IOUs faster than the economy produces goods, doesn't summon grain, cloth, or labor into existence. It only rearranges who gets them. The interest on the debt is not a number on a schedule. The interest is trust itself, paid out of the crowd's willingness to keep pretending. Coercion arrived masked as policy. Price edicts, forced acceptance, penalties for discounting, ceremonies for new issues, threats for counterfeiters, as if the real problem were imitation rather than dilution. These moves can quiet the surface. They do not reverse the current. People become experts at workarounds. 2 ledgers for the same shop, one price before noon and another after. Paper for small purchases only. Neighbors learn who has coins and whom to ask first. Money is a network, and networks have tipping points. The first defector looks reckless. The 5th looks calculating. The 50th looks wise. By the time you notice the exodus, the momentum is solving your debate for you. Then there was the competitor that did not care about proclamations. Silver fit through the economy's narrowest passages. A basket of grain could be priced against it today and tomorrow, without waiting for a clerk to tell you what a note should be worth. A shipment of silk could be paid for in a medium accepted not only in your city, but in your trading partner, a distant port. When taxes began favoring a single medium to eliminate confusion, people converged on the thing least confusing. The moment a parallel money solves more problems than the official one, the parallel road becomes the highway. The state can pave it or be dragged along it. We call what happened to Ming paper a collapse, as if there is always a day that breaks faith beyond repair. There is a day when the heart knows. Before that day is a long apprenticeship in disappointment. Each discount rehearses the decision. Each workaround rehearses the refusal. Each proclamation rehearses the ritual of ignoring. Overnight is how the losing side explains years of signals it couldn't afford to acknowledge. Still, from a family's point of view, one payday to the next, it is an ambush. The food that cost 3 notes now costs 5. The landlord who tolerated paper last season now asks politely for something real. The savings you kept for emergencies feel like theater props. The state did not disappear. It was adjusted. It accepted a world where its paper was not an instrument, but a suggestion. In account books, the treasurers still wrote totals. In markets, those totals translated into long conversations and short tempers. To keep roads repaired and troops paid, administrators stepped more fully into the silver stream they had not created and could no longer resist. The economy, which had always been a negotiation between geography and policy, put geography back in charge. Mines an ocean away were now a fact of domestic life. What survives when the promise evaporates is always the same cluster of things. Anchors survive, claims that cannot be expanded at will. In some eras, that anchor is metal. In others, it is land, produce, tools, or stockpiles of necessities. Optionality survives. The ability to trade in more than one medium so that when one road closes, you choose another without drama. Liquidity survives. The power to settle today, which buys you bargains tomorrow when forced sellers appear. Production survives. The capacity to make what others actually need so that your value proposition does not require a lecture on legal tender. You can draw a line from that market, that proclamation, that sigh from a shopkeeper, to the modern world and feel the rhythm repeat. We have more sophisticated mechanisms, better statistics, and a loftier language. We still rely on trust. Trust in restraint, trust in rules, trust that obligations will be honored when it hurts. Overissuance can hide behind technical phrases. Convertibility can be psychological rather than metallic, a promise of policy rather than a promise of redemption into a thing. Legal tender laws are powerful until markets reacquaint you with what the word legal cannot buy. Network effects are still merciless. The first person to hedge looks paranoid. The last looks gullible. The middle looks shrewd enough to keep their seat. None of this is an argument against paper. Paper is a tool. It expands opportunity and lowers friction when it rides on a strong spine of credibility. The warning is simpler. Paper is not money. Trust is. Paper is how trust travels. Notes are a map of belief at a moment in time. If the terrain changes and the printers refuse to redraw the map, the walkers will stop following it. They will find their own paths, and they will pay each other for directions. Imagine the note on a table. It is beautiful, bordered with careful ornament, crowded with characters that promise heaven's backing and the emperor's resolve. Its warning to counterfeiters is fierce, which is itself a confession that the line between official and imitation has grown too thin. Across from it sits a small silver ingot, an ugly little brick of silence. The note declares what it is worth. The ingot says nothing. The seller chooses, and in that gesture you watch a referendum on the future. The bill is eloquent. The metal is heavy. The hand moves to the thing that has no speech but plenty of gravity. When people say trust vanished overnight, they are describing the click the mind makes when yesterday S story can no longer predict today S price. The overnight is human. The decline took years. 100 small doubts aligned like stars, and suddenly there was a constellation with a name. If you happened to be holding the wrong promise when the sky changed, the experience feels like theft in the dark. It isn't a conspiracy, it's a policy mistake stretched across time and paid for in crowded courtyards and thin soups. The Ming learned the lesson every issuer learns eventually. You can force acceptance, but you cannot force confidence. You can punish discounts, but you cannot punish mathematics. You can decorate paper with all the power titles and sacred symbols in the world, but prices take their orders from belief, not from seals. When printing outruns discipline, paper does what paper always does. It becomes paper again. The markets, which are just people talking with numbers, will vote on tomorrow with the only ballot that counts, what they will accept in exchange for something real. So what survives when money fails is not luck or favoritism or even power. What survives is the cluster of habits and holdings that do not need a promise to remain themselves. Hankers, optionality, liquidity, production, the quiet virtues, the things you can stack, plant, repair, learn. The second story about value you keep ready when the first one stops being convincing. You do not have to be cynical to prepare. You only have to be honest about how often human beings convince themselves that this time we can print value faster than we produce it. Every crisis is a transfer, from the many who trusted to the few who prepared, from paper promises to tangible value, from passive savers to active builders. That is not a verdict on the morality of anyone involved. It is a description of how pressure moves through a system when the faith that glued it together peels off. Ming paper money didn't collapse because paper is evil. It collapsed because trust was overdrawn. When the crowd finally looked from the ink to the bread and realized the story no longer matched the meal, the correction felt like a storm. But storms do not invent the weather, they reveal it. Politicians promise stability, officials promise order, printers promise supply. But money is the crowd's vote on tomorrow. If the vote flips, the notes don't matter.